23-year-old woman, no kids, no husband, financially stable. I run my own consulting firm. Life is quiet, clean, and exactly the way I built it, without a single cent or ounce of support from the family I was born into. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Idaho, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's business before the mail gets delivered. My father, Charles, ran a small chain of hardware stores, not flashy but solid. The stores were inherited from his father, who was apparently some kind of local legend for building something from nothing. My dad loved that line. He repeated it like a sermon. There were just 4 of us in the house growing up. Me, my dad, my mom, and my younger brother, Caleb, who's 2 years younger. From the start, it was clear who the heir was. Caleb was the golden boy. My dad didn't even try to hide it. He was being groomed for leadership by the time he was 12, while I was told to help your mother or stay out of the way. When I was 15, I told my dad I wanted to go to college out of state. His exact words? "I'm not wasting money on a girl's education. Girls go to college just to find a husband." He said it without flinching. My mom just sat at the kitchen table staring down at her coffee like she could fall in and disappear. She didn't agree. Not really, but she never argued with him either. I think she was afraid of what would happen if she did. So I left at 18, with a full scholarship and a suitcase that barely zipped. I worked nights at a diner and weekends tutoring math. I took out loans, I ate discount ramen and stretched every penny until it screamed. But I made it through. Graduated top of my class, got an entry-level job in accounting, then worked my way up into corporate finance. 7 years ago, I started my own consulting firm. I now have 6 employees and more clients than I can handle. Not once has anyone in my family acknowledged any of that. Not when I graduated, not when I landed my first big promotion, not when I bought my first house at 28. I sent a Christmas card with a photo of my new place that year. Never heard a word back. Meanwhile, Caleb got a car at 16. He got a job at one of the stores right after high school, and by 22, he was already being referred to as the future CEO. My dad gave him everything: access, mentorship, money, even co-signed on his first house. But Caleb never had a clue what he was doing. He hired the wrong people, let shelves go half empty, didn't know how to manage inventory, and thought Facebook ads were a waste of time. It was a mess. The business started slipping a few years ago. The town had changed, people shopped online more, and big box stores were eating into their base. My dad refused to adapt. He called e-commerce a fad and said real business was done face-to-face. That might have worked in 1980, but not anymore. 2 years ago, they came to me. Not for money. At first, they just wanted advice. I spent a week reviewing their books, inventory data, local trends. I put together a full roadmap: rebranding, digital storefront, local partnerships, a targeted marketing strategy. I gave it to them free, tied in a bow. They didn't follow a single recommendation, not one. A few months later, they came back again. This time, asking for a loan. I told them flat out, I don't invest in businesses that don't take me seriously. My father hung up on me. Then came last Thanksgiving. Against my better judgment, I went. I thought maybe my mom wanted me there. Maybe things had thawed. They hadn't. My father stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass to Caleb for keeping the family dream alive. Then he turned to me, smirked, and added, "And thank you for not dragging us down." Nobody said anything, not my mom, not Caleb. Just silence, as if it was a perfectly normal thing to say to your daughter. I finished my wine, got up, and left without saying goodbye. Drove home in total silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the growing feeling that something had shifted for good. That was the last time I saw any of them face to face. Because that night, I made a decision. If my father was so obsessed with legacy, I was going to make damn sure his ended with me. And I wasn't going to do it with drama. I was going to do it clean, quiet, surgical. The day after that Thanksgiving dinner, I cleaned out my inbox, deleted every old family email, and made a list. At the top of the list, cut the cord, for good. By Monday, I had a consultation scheduled with a lawyer I trust. She handles estate planning, corporate structure, that kind of thing. We sat down in her office and I explained what I wanted. Simple. Clean. I didn't want a single dollar of my money, business, or retirement to ever touch my family line. No inheritance, no shared trusts, no accidental hand-me-downs. We rewrote my entire will. Every asset my company shares, real estate savings, intellectual property, was redirected into a living trust with specific instructions. If anything happens to me, it goes toward a scholarship fund. No exceptions. Next step, I started laying the groundwork for that fund. It's a STEM scholarship for women, launching on my 40th birthday. It'll be merit-based with a focus on underrepresented students from small towns, girls like I used to be, the ones nobody bets on. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got an email from Caleb. Quick favor. The message was 3 paragraphs long, pretending to be casual but clearly desperate. He wanted to know if I could recommend someone who specializes in business restructuring. He claimed he was looking to pivot the company. No mention of what happened over the holiday. I replied the same day. Booked until 2042, not taking clients with misogynist board chairs. No greeting, no signature. He didn't reply. Elm. But the next day, my father called. Straight to voicemail. It was a 1-minute rant about how I was spiteful, ungrateful, and cold. He ended it with "women just get emotional. That's why they shouldn't be in charge." I blocked his number before the message even finished playing. I blocked Caleb too. Emails, texts, socials. Wiped it all. A few days later, my aunt messaged me on Facebook. She asked if I was proud of tearing the family apart. I didn't respond. But I did some digging. Turns out my dad had been telling people around town that I was going bankrupt and that my firm was a hollow shell. Classic projection. So I posted a photo on my business page. Nothing flashy. Just me standing in my new office, sunlight coming through the windows. And behind me, a massive wall plaque listing our current client portfolio. Cast caption thriving. My best friend Liv sent me a laughing emoji and said it was the classiest takedown she'd seen all year. I skipped Christmas entirely. No phone calls, no cards, no fake cheer. Instead, I spent 10 days in Iceland. No family, no drama, just quiet towns, snow-covered lava fields, and long hours in warm cafes. I signed off from everything and came back with half a journal full of new ideas. One of those ideas turned into a personal blog. I started documenting my career journey, not in a motivational way, but in a "this is what it actually takes" kind of way. From scholarships and loans to late-night spreadsheets and bad bosses. I didn't name names, but I didn't soften any of it. Within a few weeks, the blog started gaining traction. People were sharing it. A few women reached out to say it reminded them of their own stories. One even told me she forwarded it to her daughter. Then came the final mail. 6 months before, I had quietly formed an LLC. No ties to my real name, no family connection, totally untraceable. Through that LLC, I purchased the commercial property that 2 of my father's hardware stores lease from. They had no idea it was me. The leases expire in 18 months. I've already decided I won't renew them. No announcement, no warnings. Just a quiet shutdown. The same way they ignored every warning sign about digital sales and proper staffing. They chose to run things like it was still 1994. Let them deal with the consequences in real time. And just like that, the legacy my father clung to started slipping through his fingers while I kept building mine, brick by brick, with no help from anyone who shared my last name. A month after locking down the will and finalizing the LLC purchase, I met with a real estate attorney just to double-check the terms of the leases tied to my father's stores. The paperwork was airtight. I had full discretion if I chose not to renew when they expired in 18 months. There was nothing they could do. No clauses, no protections, not even a buyout option unless I offered it. A week later, I got an email through the contact form on my blog. No name, just an anonymous address. Attached were 8 photos from inside one of my father's stores. Empty aisles, a broken HVAC unit with a handwritten sign taped to it, Steve shelves with outdated packaging. One section had a stack of expired caulking tubes that should have been thrown out a year ago. I ran the photos through metadata, tools. Timestamps matched. They were real. I hired a private investigator to do a full inspection. On paper, he was acting as a consultant, looking for commercial investment opportunities in the area. What he found was worse than I expected. One location had a leaking roof that was patched with tarp and duct tape. The back storage area had mildew along the walls. There was one functioning register, and the employee using it didn't even know how to process a return. No cameras, no clean inventory system, 2 bathrooms, both out of order. According to him, it was a borderline code violation across the board. I contacted my lawyer again and asked about the local ordinances. Turns out, as the property owner, if the business fails a formal code inspection, I can terminate the lease early. No court needed. All I'd have to do is report it. I didn't act right away. I wasn't sure if I wanted to watch it fall apart slowly or if I wanted to be the one to tip it over. Then, out of nowhere, one of Caleb's former employees reached out. She found my blog and figured out who I was. She told me Caleb owed her 3 months of back pay and never gave her a proper separation notice. She sent screenshots, texts, schedules, pay stubs, all legit. That made 3 ex-employees who'd come forward. None of them were looking for anything. They just wanted to vent, share proof, and in one case, warned me that my father was telling people I was trying to destroy the business. Out of jealousy, I started documenting everything. Not to take legal action, at least not yet, but to keep in my pocket in case they tried to drag my name through the mud publicly. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story. Around that time, a producer from a small business podcast reached out. One of their researchers had read my blog and wanted to feature my story anonymously if needed. I haven't said yes yet, but I bookmarked the email. The message from Caleb's former employee stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because it was shocking. By now, I knew exactly what kind of mess he was running, but because of the tone. Exhausted, disillusioned, but not vindictive. Just someone who'd given more than she got, and who finally decided to tell the truth. That email marked a shift. Until then, I'd kept everything surgical, clean, logical. But reading her words, her receipts, her screenshots of text messages where he promised back pay that never came, I felt something deeper kick in, a bone-deep clarity. This wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about drawing a line in permanent ink. I created a private folder, password locked, labeled closure. In it, I began collecting everything. Photos from the inspections, transcripts from my father's voicemail, Caleb's emails, social media posts, news clippings from the store closures, even testimonials from ex-employees. Not to use, not yet, but just in case. I knew men like my father. Their greatest skill wasn't building businesses. It was rewriting failure as betrayal. I wasn't going to let that narrative take root. A month later, the podcast producer followed up. She asked if I'd be willing to do an audio interview. Anonymous, if I preferred. I said yes, but told her I wanted full editorial control. She agreed. We recorded in a quiet studio in the city, just me and a mic and a producer behind the glass. I told her everything. How I left home with nothing. How I built a career in boardrooms where I was the only woman under 40. How I paid off student loans by eating peanut butter off a spoon for dinner. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The message was clear. Survival wasn't enough. I had built a new ecosystem. One where the next girl from a dead-end town didn't have to survive. She could thrive. The episode aired on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had over 200 new emails in my blog inbox. Most were from women. A few were from men who said they finally understood what their sisters or daughters had gone through. But the one that hit me hardest was from a girl in Indiana. She was 17. She wrote, "I listened to your story on my mom's speakers while we were folding laundry. We cried. I want to be like you, but maybe a little earlier." I read it 3 times before saving it to my desktop. The blog numbers spiked, traffic doubled, then tripled. I started getting interview requests, book offers, panel invitations. I said no to most. This wasn't supposed to become a brand. It was just my truth, finally given oxygen. But behind the scenes, I kept moving. I bought the second building, not the one my father rented, the one next door. A larger unit, high ceilings, great natural light. Formerly a thrift store, now just dust and opportunity. I hired a team to renovate it. Quietly, no signs, no announcements. In 6 months, it would be a community hub, a resource center for women pursuing careers in STEM, workshops, mentoring, free co-working space with high-speed internet and good coffee. Everything I wished had existed when I was 18 and invisible. As for my father's stores, the decay accelerated. One unit was cited for electrical issues. The other had a plumbing failure that left half the space unusable. My attorney notified them. Under the lease terms, I had the right to terminate. Caleb sent a letter through his lawyer, threatening to sue for breach. My attorney responded with 80 pages of documentation, complete with photos, timestamps, code citations, and employee testimonies. They didn't respond again. That was the last formal contact. Word spread quickly in town. Some people were confused, others not so much. I'd started getting anonymous notes through my blog's P.O. box. One simply said, "Thank you for finally doing what should have been done years ago." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I recognized the sentiment. Not revenge. Release. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow. We expanded our client base internationally. One of my senior consultants was invited to speak in Berlin. Another launched a mentorship program for interns. I approved every dollar of it. Some nights I sat in my office and just watched the lights from the city below, wondering how many women had done this kind of thing. Built a life from scratch while pretending they weren't haunted. The day the scholarship fund officially opened, I got up early. No ceremony, no media, just logged in, confirmed the launch, and sat with my coffee in silence. The first application came in 17 minutes later. A girl from Montana, 18, first-gen college student, wanted to study mechanical engineering. Her essay ended with the words, "I don't want to be saved. I want the tools to save myself." I cried. For the first time in years, I let myself cry without feeling weak. That same week, my mother emailed me. Just a few lines, no subject. She said my father wasn't well, that he sometimes forgot where he was, that he had asked about me, confused. She didn't ask me to visit. She didn't ask for anything, really, just told me. I read it twice, then archived it. I didn't feel anger, not anymore. Just an old ache like pressing on a bruise that's healed but never faded. I never responded. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. I recognized the scrawl instantly. My father. The envelope was shaky, like his hands were no longer steady. Inside, 4 pages. Rambling, defensive, half apology, half justification. I did what I thought was best. Men of my generation didn't know how to raise daughters like you. Caleb was always weaker than he looked. But not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he say he was proud. I read the first 3 paragraphs, then stopped. I folded the letter and burned it in a small dish on my balcony. The ashes floated upward into the city night. That weekend, we held the soft launch of the center. Just 30 people, students, mentors, friends, no photographers, no ribbon cutting, just real work. One of the girls gave a short talk about her project, a mobile app to help teens negotiate job offers. She blushed when the crowd clapped. I handed her a small grant from the fund. She teared up. Her mother hugged me and whispered, "You have no idea what this means to us." But I did. I knew exactly. That night, I walked through the new space alone. Clean white walls, sun through the high windows. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was building toward something. Not legacy, not revenge, but freedom. For them. For me. For all the girls they said would never make it. And yet, here we were, brick by brick, unbreakable. By the time the center was operating at full capacity, with rotating mentors, weekend workshops, and a solid pipeline of scholarship applicants, I had almost forgotten about the clock ticking down on the hardware store leases. Almost. 18 months had felt far away when I first bought the properties, but now, the date sat like a red circle on a silent calendar in the back of my mind. Every once in a while, I'd get an update from my property manager or from one of the local inspectors, and each time it was the same. Still a mess, still non-compliant, still running on fumes and nostalgia. I had expected more noise from Caleb, some kind of legal threat or backdoor scheme, but he was either too broke or too worn down to fight. That didn't mean he wasn't trying something. A contact of mine, someone I'd done work for years ago, a commercial real estate broker, called me out of the blue one Friday. He was vague, just said he had a curious situation in a certain town in Idaho, and my name had come up. I asked for details. He said a man, early 30s, pushy, sweating desperation, had approached him about listing 2 hardware stores for sale as part of a legacy pivot. His words, not mine. Apparently, the man claimed the stores were being modernized, that there was room to grow, and that the owner of the properties, meaning me, was a passive investor open to renegotiating lease terms. That was a lie. I asked for the man's name. Of course, it was Caleb. My contact hadn't moved forward, not yet, because something didn't feel right. I told him the truth. Not everything, just enough. The buildings were under a non-renewal clause. The tenant had been served notices. Any buyer would inherit liabilities and an eviction in progress. The listing never went live. That same week, Caleb sent me an email. Short, hollow, performative. He wrote, "I've been thinking. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. The world is changing, and I know I didn't always do the right thing. Maybe we could talk about the future." No apology. No reference to the voicemail he'd left me months earlier. No mention of our father's decades of dismissal or the Thanksgiving toast that triggered this final split. I didn't respond. But I forwarded the email to my lawyer, just in case. I knew what this was. Panic wearing a polite mask. The local paper ran a small piece about declining retail activity in the area. A passing reference to long-standing family businesses struggling to evolve. I didn't need the name to know. I kept waiting for the blowback, for someone in town to publish a scathing op-ed, for my mother to reach out with some scolding about decency or forgiveness. But the silence stayed. It had weight now. It wasn't absence. It was the presence of boundary. I liked it. I had built something, finally, where no one could twist the narrative to make me the villain. And yet a small part of me watched the timeline inch closer, wondering if they'd realize what was about to happen. 18 months wasn't a suggestion. It was a deadline. When the date finally arrived, I sent the final non-renewal notice at 8:00 a.m. sharp. No emotion, just legal precision, 30 days to vacate, no extensions, no discussion. The properties were already listed with a new agent. I planned to convert one into a satellite workspace for small local startups, and the other into a hybrid retail event space, with rotating pop-ups and maker showcases. A modern answer to what used to be. I didn't announce any of this publicly. I didn't need to. But someone leaked it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone from the renovation crew. Either way, it spread fast. The whispers reached Caleb. 2 days later, he showed up at my office. I don't know how he got past the front desk. Maybe he used his full name. Maybe he said he was family. Either way, I walked out of my meeting and found him in the lobby, standing awkwardly next to the glass wall, wearing a blazer that didn't fit and eyes that were all corners. He looked older, not in the way time naturally changes people, but in the way desperation folds them in. He said my name like we were still kids. I said, "You need to leave." He didn't. Instead, he launched into a speech, one he clearly rehearsed, about second chances, about how Dad never saw either of us clearly, and how he's not the man I thought he was, about the pressure he'd been under, the weight of expectation, about how maybe we could start over. I didn't flinch. I let him talk. It wasn't remorse. It was bargaining. When he finished, I said, "I didn't do any of this to hurt you. I just stopped helping you hurt me." He blinked like I'd slapped him. I walked him to the door. He didn't fight. I haven't seen him since. A few weeks later, I flew to New York for a conference where I was asked to give a keynote on ethical exits and intergenerational leadership. I laughed when I saw the title, The irony was almost poetic. But I went. I stood on stage and told the story, not of my family, not directly, but of what it means to build something that isn't rooted in someone else's shadow. The crowd was quiet at first, then a few nods, then applause. A woman approached me afterward, maybe in her late 40s. She said she'd just left a business she co-founded with her father. "It's terrifying," she said, "but I've never felt more awake." I told her I understood. I did. That night, I opened a bottle of wine in my hotel room and stared at the skyline, 100 stories of light built from steel and sweat and ambition. And I realized something. I had thought this story would end when the leases expired, when the stores shut down, when the silence became permanent. But I was wrong. That was just the middle. The real story was still being written, not in headlines or family drama, but in classrooms, in blog posts, in girls learning to say no without apology, and yes, without permission. It was being written every time someone chose herself, cleanly, without burning the whole world down. And maybe that was the legacy I'd been chasing all along. Not inheritance, not recognition, but proof that it could be done, that it was worth doing. That being the one who breaks the pattern is hard, but it's also the most sacred work there is. The closing of the stores happened with less resistance than I imagined, and maybe that was the most surreal part. How anticlimactic it all felt after a lifetime of being made to feel like I was the disruption, the disappointment, the outsider. I had expected protest, manipulation, even some last-ditch attempt at emotional blackmail, but in the end, it was just dust and keys and faded signage being unscrewed by a contractor I barely knew. No phone calls, no emails, no grand confrontations, just silence. I got the notification from my property manager that both spaces had been vacated by the deadline, and within 3 days the locks had been changed, the storefronts cleared, and all branding stripped away. I watched the security footage of the last truck pulling away from the second store, a small pickup loaded with battered shelving units and a broken vending machine. And I sat there longer than I needed to, not because I felt victorious, but because I felt resolved. I hadn't burned it down. I hadn't screamed or retaliated or thrown stones. I had simply closed the book and started writing another. The building that had once housed the flagship store was already deep in renovation. The transformation was more than structural. It was personal. Every time I walked through that space, now stripped of its old fixtures and chipped counters, I imagined what it would become. A place where ambition wasn't mocked or minimized, where ideas didn't have to be filtered through family politics or outdated gender scripts. I hired local artists to create murals on the interior walls, each one celebrating women from small towns who had changed their fields. Scientists, engineers, educators, visionaries, women who had been told no and walked through the wall anyway. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but subtlety had never protected me. Strategy had. One afternoon, while walking the site with the lead architect, I saw something scrawled on the inside of a utility closet door, written in faded marker. It said, "Built by Charles, 1997. My father, a timestamp of pride and permanence, left like a mark on history. I took a picture of it, then had the closet removed and the door saved. I donated it to the town's historical society, anonymously, without ceremony. That was his monument now, tucked away in the archives with the faded newspapers and factory blueprints. I didn't need to erase him. I just needed to outgrow him." Meanwhile, the center next door continued to thrive. Applications for the scholarship fund quadrupled, and we expanded our mentorship program to include virtual sessions for students outside the region. My staff, all women, all first-generation professionals, began designing curriculum for financial literacy and negotiation workshops tailored for teens. Every time I saw one of them lead a session, calm and certain and unbothered by self-doubt, I felt something loosen inside me. Not vengeance, not justice, just a kind of deep, unshakable healing. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about building something so solid, so rooted in clarity and self-worth, that nothing they said or did could ever chip at it again. Around that same time, I received an unexpected invitation from the state university where I'd once graduated at the top of my class. They wanted to honor me at their annual alumni gala, not just for my professional achievements, but for my philanthropic work with the scholarship fund. It was the first formal recognition I'd ever received tied to the world I left behind, and for a moment I hesitated. Part of me worried it was some symbolic rope pulling me back into a past I'd outgrown. But the other part, the part that remembered scraping through lectures on 2 hours of sleep and digging coins out of couch cushions for bus fare, said go. I did. I wore a deep green suit, clean lines, no apologies. I stood at that podium, looking out at rows of polished faces, and I told the truth. Not about my father or my brother, just about what it meant to have no net. About how much easier it is to build a ladder when someone hands you tools instead of telling you to stay quiet and wait your turn. Afterward, a girl, maybe 20, maybe younger, approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "I thought I was the only one who had to leave home to breathe." I hugged her. I told her to build her oxygen and never apologize for needing clean air. The trip home afterward was quiet. No calls from family, of course. Just a string of texts from Liv, my best friend, my chosen sister, asking for pictures and telling me she cried during my speech even though she hadn't seen it yet. She always knew how to soften the sharpest days. A few nights later, while closing out emails, I received a message from someone with a familiar last name I didn't expect. It wasn't my brother, it wasn't my mother, it was Caleb's ex-wife. We'd only met once years ago, at some forced family barbecue. She had seemed polite, nervous, watchful. Her message was long, but respectful. She told me they'd divorced officially 6 months earlier, that she had seen my blog by accident. Someone had forwarded it to a women's group she was part of, and it had taken her weeks to realize who I was. She said reading my words had helped her make peace with her own story, that she too had been minimized, erased, pushed into the background of someone else's idea of legacy. She didn't ask for anything. She just said thank you. I responded with care. I told her I was glad she got out, that healing wasn't a destination, it was a practice. She replied once more. That was it. No drama, no shared trauma bonding, just two women on the other side of a slow, necessary fire. In the weeks that followed, I thought more and more about what it meant to finish this story. Not end it. Life doesn't work in endings, but finish it. Put a final thread through the fabric, not to burn bridges, but to landscape the path so no one mistook silence for weakness ever again. I commissioned a small metal sculpture to be placed in the courtyard between the two properties I now owned, the former hardware store and the center. Nothing grand, just a tall spiral of interconnected rings. The plaque beneath it reads, "What we build matters. What we unbuild even more." I didn't put my name on it. I didn't have to. Those who knew would know. And those who didn't would still benefit. That was enough. That was everything. Because legacy, real legacy, isn't what you leave behind. It's what no longer holds you back. By the time summer arrived, the final traces of my father's business had all but vanished from public view, as though it had been quietly erased from the town's landscape without anyone bothering to memorialize it. The building that once housed his name, cast in metal above the entrance in those bold, confident letters, now bore a minimalist sign for the new initiative, a rotating innovation lab funded by my firm and maintained through a hybrid model of local sponsorships and tech sector partnerships. I never branded it with my personal identity, and I didn't need to. People knew. Even the ones who never spoke it aloud, even the ones who still carried whatever loyalty or misplaced nostalgia they had for the man who once held court behind that counter, still knew. I saw it in the sideways glances when I walked through town to visit the site. I saw it in the way some people nodded, not warm, but not hostile either, a kind of acknowledgement. The old guard stayed mostly silent. Some of my father's former peers had retired, some moved, some simply faded into the same dust that coated the back rooms of those dying hardware stores. But there were others, younger ones, women mostly, who had started to reach out to me quietly. They weren't looking for alliances, not exactly. They wanted strategy, insight, partnership. A real seat at the table or maybe a new table entirely. And I was ready for that. I'd been ready. My company had begun a slow but steady expansion over the past year, and I used the momentum to build out a new branch focused solely on advisory work for women-led businesses in transitional phases. Exits, growth shifts, capital restructuring. We called it Phase 0, because that's where most of us had to start, not Phase 1, where the playbooks assume you've already been handed a base, but before the start line where you're inventing the rules just to qualify. My blog became more structured too, less personal, but no less honest. I still told stories, but they were shared intentionally now, designed to equip rather than vent. I brought in guest contributors, women from across industries, some successful, some just beginning, all of them navigating versions of the same uphill map. The traffic quadrupled again. Then came the publisher offers. I turned them down before, but this time I didn't. One of them got it right. Didn't want a memoir, didn't want a tell-all, just a guidebook for girls building in silence. We signed the deal in the fall, and the manuscript was due within 8 months. I wrote in the early mornings before client calls, before meetings, before my inbox caught fire. Some days it felt like stitching open wounds. Other days, like planting seeds I knew I wouldn't live long enough to see bloom. But I kept writing. Around that same time, I was invited to a major summit on leadership and innovation, a massive event usually dominated by venture capitalists and founders in overpriced sneakers. I debated whether to go. The idea of standing on stage and performing resilience for a crowd that wouldn't recognize it if it broke their balance sheets made me nauseous. But Liv talked me into it. "You're not going for them," she said. "You're going for the girl in the back row who's pretending not to cry into her free conference tote." So I went, and I told the story again, trimmed down, sharpened, told through the lens of systems and structure, not sob stories. I showed data, outcomes, before and after case studies from women who had come through our programs. The applause was loud, but it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the line of women afterward. Not just the back row girl, but CFOs, analysts, founders, all telling me the same thing. I didn't know we were allowed to do it like this. That phrase stuck with me. I didn't know we were allowed. It's the quiet anthem of every underestimated woman I've ever met. So I printed it, on stickers, on postcards, on the inside of every scholarship welcome packet. That winter, I returned to the town briefly for a board meeting with one of the regional education initiatives we'd been supporting. I stayed in a small rental just outside the city limits, a glass-fronted cabin overlooking pine trees and fog. One morning, while drinking coffee on the deck, I saw a car pull up along the edge of the road. A woman stepped out, maybe early 60s, brown coat, hands in her pockets. It was my mother. I don't know how she found the address. I didn't panic. I just stood there, still, waiting. She didn't wave, didn't walk up the drive. She just looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw it. The absence behind her eyes, the hollow space where conviction should have lived. I waited for something, anything. A word, a gesture, even a look of regret. Nothing came, just that empty stare. I turned and went inside. I didn't look back. She was gone by the time I finished my coffee. I never told Liv about it. I didn't need to. Some things lose power when spoken. Others never had it to begin with. Months passed. The book neared completion. The final chapter, the one I kept putting off, was titled Cutting the Cord. I thought it would be the easiest to write. It wasn't. Because cutting the cord doesn't mean you stop feeling the phantom pull. It doesn't mean you forget the weight. It means you learn to stand anyway, with balance that's yours and yours alone. I finished it on the anniversary of the day I left home with nothing but a suitcase and a scholarship. 17 years to the day. I sent the manuscript off that night. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find an email from a school principal in a rural district I'd never heard of. He said one of his students had been awarded the scholarship. She'd taped the acceptance letter to her locker. She told him it was the first time anyone outside her family had told her she was good enough. He attached a photo of her holding the letter, beaming, surrounded by classmates. I stared at the photo for a long time, not because I was proud, though I was, but because it confirmed what I'd always suspected deep down. That legacy isn't built in bloodlines or balance sheets. It's built in the quiet, compounding moments when someone feels seen, when someone believes they're allowed. That was the real inheritance. Not my father's name, not the family business, not the empty gestures of a household that chose silence over support. This movement, this proof, this steady, relentless rebuilding of worth. And it was only just beginning. The book launched quietly, just how I wanted. No signings, no television appearances, no promotional tour, just a digital release, a handful of podcasts, and a short statement posted on my blog. This is not about me. It's about all of us who got told no and went anyway. The book hit its niche hard. Career coaches recommended it. Book clubs adopted it. University programs requested permission to use chapters as course material. The sales didn't matter. What mattered were the letters. Hundreds of them. Some handwritten, some typed, some in shaky text full of autocorrect errors and raw emotion. A single mother in Kansas said it helped her finally ask for a raise after 5 years of silence. A girl in New Mexico said it made her apply for a coding boot camp even though her uncle told her women don't do tech. A grandmother in Maine said she was starting a business at 63 and was dedicating it to the version of herself who never had the chance. Every one of those notes felt like a stone laid on a path that hadn't existed before. One of them, from a teenage girl in a foster home in Idaho, simply said, "Your book was the first time I realized I wasn't broken, just underestimated." That letter is framed in my home office. Not the fancy office downtown, but the one in my apartment. The quiet space with the messy desk and the plant I always forget to water. That's where I feel most honest. That's where I felt it. The shift. That deep seismic click when you know a cycle has ended and nothing is pulling you back anymore. Not shame, not guilt, not the ache of old wounds. Just peace. My company had grown. The foundation was fully operational, with independent leadership and 5 regional chapters. The center in my hometown had become a model that other cities wanted to replicate, but none of that carried the weight it once did. It wasn't about success now. It was about sustainability. Stability. A kind of legacy I wouldn't have to micromanage because it wasn't built around me. It was built around the need. Then, just as the final phase of the year's projects wrapped up, I received a letter. A real one. Postmarked from a hospital in Boise. Inside, a single folded page in careful, halting handwriting. From my father. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It read, "I don't know what day it is. Sometimes I don't know my own name. But today I knew yours. And I wanted to write it before I forgot it again. You were right. I was wrong. You saw where the world was going. I stayed stuck. I thought if I admitted that, I'd disappear. I think maybe I already have. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know I remember. And I'm sorry." That was all. No signature. Just that. I didn't cry. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't save it either. I folded it back up and left it on a park bench downtown the next morning, between a public sculpture and a trash can. Maybe someone picked it up. Maybe the wind took it. Either way, it's gone. The man who raised me was already gone long before that letter. What remained was just noise. Fading, distant, irrelevant. Closure, for me, wasn't found in that apology. It was found in the life I built without ever needing one. 2 months later, I flew back to Idaho one last time. The building was finally finished. What once was the flagship store of my father's imagined empire was now a space full of light and motion. A modern co-op for first-time founders, coders, designers, creators. No plaques, no dedications, no reminders of what used to be, just momentum. And in the entryway, a small bronze sculpture, a woman stepping over a broken chain. No face, no name, just motion. On the wall beside it, a quote, "They told her she couldn't. She didn't listen." I stood there alone for a long time that night. The building was empty. We hadn't opened to the public yet. But it didn't feel silent. It felt full. Full of every girl who ever sat in the back of a classroom hoping someone would believe in her. Full of every woman who held her breath in a meeting so she wouldn't be called aggressive for knowing her worth. Full of the version of me who once thought being cut off from your family meant being cut off from a future. She was wrong. The bloodline ends here, but the legacy, the real one, is just beginning. Because this time it's not about a name, it's about a choice. And I chose to build. From scratch, from scars, from spite, from hope. I built a world where the next girl doesn't have to earn her voice through survival. She just gets to speak. And that finally is enough.